Article 2 of the Constitution states that the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. In other words, it is the President that defines the executive branch. When you read this language, it says that no court may take over that role. No court may define or limit the scope of the duties of an official of the executive office of the President, the people who work in the executive office. I think that what your amendment does is a violation of separation of powers, and it's a violation of Article 2 of the Constitution.
The gentlelady yield?
Yes, I will.
It's always good when the constitutionalist specialist comes in. It helps us all. So what you're saying is that the bill codifies Article 2 for purposes of the court being reminded and instructed of their limitations, and the amendment would undo that.
That's exactly right, because then it would imply that a federal court could in fact define or limit the scope of the duties of those individuals who work within the executive office of the President, and that is not a federal court's role. That is for, under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, that power is vested in a President of the United States of America.
Could the gentlelady further yield for another question?
Yes.
Your understanding is, with the current president, or the last one, or the next one, if we don't do something like this, realistically, the chief executive, president, would continue to have to answer a myriad of claims in up to not just 50 states, but multiple places in 50 states. And if that tactic was used, even more so than it may have been used in the past, that you would have a president having to use non-official funds to answer a series of cases alleged not to be that way. Is that true?
That's the way that I read this, and I think that it's very clear, especially starting in 2017 when President Trump was sworn in the first time, that the courts have been used for nefarious purposes on a variety of issues. In fact, yesterday we had a hearing in our constitutional subcommittee about lawfare and how lawfare had been weaponized against President Trump, both while he was president as well as after his presidency. So again, I guess that I'm very skeptical of the idea that people are not willing to use lawfare to go after a current or former president. We've seen it over the last 9 years in many different instances. But the president is the one who gets to define the limit and scope of the duties of the personnel within his office. That is very clear from Article 2 of the Constitution.
Will the gentlelady yield for a question on that?
Yes.
But I assume you've read the Chief Justice's opinion in Trump versus United States. And if so, are you saying that this decision was wrongly decided in distinguishing between core functions of the president, where his discretion is indeed absolute, as you suggest, the official acts that are not within his core functions, where Chief Justice Roberts says that's subject to a balancing test, and then private and unofficial acts where he doesn't get to define it all, that's up to the court?
We're not talking about immunity. We're talking about something entirely different. It's about who gets to define, who defines, and I think—
But that's precisely what they did with respect to immunity.
It's the gentlelady's time.
Okay.
When you read the decision, they did not strip the president of the ability to define or limit the scope—
Yes, they did.
—the duties of the personnel within
They
his
said
office.
if it's private and unofficial, the court will know it. And that's exactly what this is about. If you rob a bank, you can't say that's part of my duties because I'm trying to reform the CFPB.
And that's not what he's saying. When you're defining or limiting the scope of the duties of an official within the executive branch within the official of the executive office of the president, all we're trying to do is prevent the violation of the separation of powers, as I've indicated. And
No, you're trying to strip the court of substantive jurisdiction over the president's powers, and you can't do that. It's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is, including over the president.
That is not what this provision says.
Well, If it doesn't, what does it say then? What does it mean to say no court may define or limit the scope of the duties of an official of the executive office of the
The
president?
executive office, the president has the ability to define the scope of the individuals that work within, the scope and the duties of the individuals that work in his office.
So that could
is
include
not for-
criminal
That is
actions.
not for a state court or a federal court to define.
So that could include criminal actions.
That is absolutely an absurdity to even
Well,
make
then
that
you're not reading
allegation.
Chief Justice Roberts' opinion. That's what it's all about. How do we constrain executive power? And you're saying you can't constrain executive power because the executive power is vested in the president. But that's a
executive branch.
tautology. But that's just a
is.
tautology. The legislative power is vested in Congress, but that doesn't mean we can do whatever we want. We can't violate people's rights.
The gentlelady's time has expired.